What's up, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of the Long Lens Podcast. This is a podcast where I answer questions from my filmmaking and YouTube community, and we just talk about all things filmmaking, YouTube, cameras. So in today's episode, I am going to be talking a little bit about the cameras that I would pick if I only had $1,000 in 2026. Maybe I was starting over. And these are cameras that I personally would choose. I'm not going to go over the best camera for every specific person. These are just going to be my own personal picks. If I had to start over again, which cameras I would actually look at. But before we get into that, I'm going to be answering some questions from my Patreon community. And if you're not aware, every month I answer questions from my Patreon members, and that's just one of the many perks that you get supporting me over on Patreon. I'm actually going to be doing an entire series on how to create YouTube videos, everything from like the ideation process, the scripting, the shooting, the editing, and then posting, and then different, tips and tricks that I use to, get the highest quality up here on YouTube, compressing it properly, and creating thumbnails even. So that's just some of the stuff that I do over on Patreon. So if you're interested in that, I would definitely say consider supporting me on Patreon. There's a few other perks, like you'll get your name at the end of some of my main channel videos, or you could also support this podcast by becoming a channel member here on this second channel of mine. That's just basically like a tip jar, and it's only like $1 a month, and you'll get a little camera badge next to your name whenever you comment on my videos or on my live streams. So without further ado, let's get into the questions on Patreon. So we have 3 questions here, and the first one is from Matt Civis. And Matt asks, "Hey Nigel, I've been hearing about FilmBox for film emulation, and I'm curious if you have played around with it yet, or if you have any thoughts on it." Now, I have heard of FilmBox before, and if you're not aware, FilmBox is another film emulation software similar to maybe like Film Convert or Dehancer, but FilmBox is much more expensive. And honestly, I have never been able to play with it at all. I know that Patrick Tommaso has done an entire video about his workflow with FilmBox, so I would probably recommend going and checking out his video on it. Honestly, it's just one of those digital products that is really hard pill to swallow, spending that much money on something like that. I've been pretty happy with what I've been able to accomplish with Film Convert and Dehancer. So those are the 2 film emulations that I use. I know that FilmBox is basically the industry standard. Like if any big production was going to be doing any film emulation on their digital footage, I know that FilmBox is what they're going to use. But I think that for the scale of videos that I'm making, it just doesn't really make sense. But I have heard of it, and I know that it looks really good and probably is the closest to film as far as film emulation goes. I've never had the opportunity to use it, but I have heard of it before, and it looks really good. If FilmBox ever reached out to me and asked if I want to try it, I would definitely take them up on that, because it's at a price point that I just wouldn't feel comfortable spending money on, especially at the level of videos that I'm currently making. All right, this next question is from a new Patreon supporter, Johan Simu. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that name right. "Have you noticed any drawback to shooting in HLG on your GH5, converting to Vlog compared to shooting in Vlog? Does one properly expose HLG in the same way as Vlog?" Yeah, so I mostly shoot in Vlog. The only time I shoot in HLG is if I'm doing really, really long form recording, so even longer than my podcast. Then I'll shoot in HLG and just convert it to Vlog. And I honestly, I pretty much just use my little exposure meter or zebras on my GH5, and that typically gets me in the ballpark. I have noticed that the shadows tend to get lost a little bit more on HLG, so I try to make sure that I don't expose it too low, because trying to bring up the shadows in HLG I've found is a little noisier than in Vlog sometimes. But yeah, I try to just use my exposure meter and my zebras when it comes to exposing. But to be honest, I don't shoot in HLG as much as I do in Vlog. I try as much as I can to shoot in Vlog because it's the color space that I'm most familiar with. So if you were going to shoot in HLG, I would definitely say use your zebras, and maybe even, attach a monitor to your camera and use false color and expose it that way. That's probably going to give you even a better representation than even what the GH5 screen is telling you. So that's what I would say. Use zebras, use false color, and just make sure that you're not clipping your highlights too much or super crushing your shadows. because that's what I tend to do whenever I shoot in HLG for some reason. Okay, and the last question that we got here on Patreon is from Nolan Natasha. And Nolan asks, hey Nigel, if you were going to match non-log Lumix footage to vlog, how would you go about it? Sometimes I go out just with my GX85 to take photos, but grab the odd video clip, and would love your advice on settings for matching with modern Lumix cameras shooting in vlog. I do have Cinematch. That honestly might not help you in this situation. What I would suggest is with the GX85, there is a hack to get Cinelike D on that camera. So that would be my first suggestion. Use that hack. It's not super hard to do and it's pretty safe, but obviously do it at your own risk. From Cinelike D, you can get pretty close. What I've done in the past is I use a color checker and then I shoot one shot with Cinelike D and then I'll shoot another shot in vlog. So you have both of those clips, and then what I do to, create my, I have a DJI Mavic Mini to vlog LUT. So it's a conversion LUT. It converts the natural, baked in profile of the Mavic Mini into vlog. I have the same thing for the GH3. It converts natural into vlog. The way that I've created those conversion LUTs is using a color checker, holding it up, shooting with both cameras at the exact same spot, exact same lighting, in a bunch of different lighting conditions. So I make sure that it works in, different lighting conditions as well. And what I do is I bring it into either Premiere or DaVinci, and I try to match both of those shots. So I keep the vlog as is, and I just go into whatever baked in profile I'm trying to get to look like vlog. And I start lowering the contrast. I start bringing up the shadows. I start lowering the highlights, messing around with the colors. And I try to get it as close as I possibly can, watching the RGB parade and the vector scope, taking up the comparison view and seeing if they look similar. And then once I get it as close as I possibly can, and honestly, it takes a while. Once I get it as close as I possibly can, I export that as a LUT, and then you can use that as a pre-LUT. So in Premiere, it's really easy. In the basic correction, you do the input LUT. And so I'll use the input LUT as, let's just say it's a, GH3 to vlog. I'll change my GH3 natural footage into vlog. And then in the creative tab, that's where I'll add my vlog LUT. So that's how I do it. I know it's very convoluted. So as I was editing this podcast, I totally blanked and realized that I had actually made 3 different conversion LUTs from Cinelike D into a couple of log profiles. So I actually just posted those on Patreon for my Patreon members for free. So Nolan, if you would like to download those should work pretty well. I have 2 different ones for Cinelike D into vlog, and then I have one from Cinelike D into ARRILOG and Cinelike D into S-Log3. So those will be available for you and any of the other paid Patreon members for free, so you can try those out. But yeah, I totally spaced. I realized that I had that exact problem myself, and I already solved it. So hopefully those LUTs work for you. And yeah, by the time you're listening to this, they're up on Patreon, free for my Patreon members. But if you want to do it yourself, that's the process that I use. You need a color checker, card, and you need 2 cameras that are shooting in different profiles. And then you just, bring it in to your color grading software and you start messing with it until it looks as close as it possibly can to the log profile that you're trying to get it to match to. So if it's already at a flat profile, it'll be a lot easier than if it's a punchier, contrasty and colorful profile. So anyways, that was a super long-winded answer, but I hope hopefully that answered your question, Nolan. Big thanks to everyone who supports me on Patreon and everyone who asked a question this month. Now let's get into my top picks for cameras in 2026. Again, if all of my cameras were taken away, I had no lenses, I had to start from complete scratch, and I only had $1,000 to spend on a camera body, these are the cameras that I would look into. Now I'm going to start from smallest sensor to largest sensor. These aren't going to be in order of what I think is the best. I'm just starting from smallest sensor to largest sensor. Now I tried to get every big camera brand that I could think of in here, just so I had a option with each brand, but honestly, Nikon doesn't really have anything under $1,000 that I would buy right now. And maybe I missed something, but I was looking into every single Nikon camera, the Z50 Mark II, the Z7, the Z6 Mark II. You can get them for under $1,000, but they aren't cameras that I would personally buy. if I was starting brand new. So these are the cameras that I kind of narrowed it down to, and I narrowed it down to, I think, 6. The number one choice would be kind of a threefold, and it's the GH5, GH5S, or GH5 Mark II. Now, all 3 of these cameras are typically pretty easy to find under $1,000, and it's a pretty easy pick for me. I'm using the GH5 right now to record this podcast. So these are just workhorse cameras. And if I was starting all over again, getting a GH5 would be a really easy decision for me because I'm so familiar with this camera. And Micro Four Thirds lenses are pretty cheap, and it's a great all-around camera. You can shoot stills with it. It's great. GH5S is very similar, just doesn't have IBIS, has better low light performance. And the GH5 Mark II has a few other upgrades past what the GH5 has. But the main thing that, clicks into my mind with the GH5 Mark II is that it has 4K 60 and 10-bit. But those are the 3 cameras in like the Lumix Micro Four Thirds realm that I would go for, just because I'm very used to this style of camera. Like the GH5 can be had for like as low as $500. And if we're going all the way up to the GH5S or GH5 Mark II, those can be had probably more around the $800 or $900, but it's pretty easy to find any 3 of these cameras under $1,000, especially on eBay. Speaking of which, I'm going to have some links to some eBay deals in the description below if you, for some reason, are in the market for any of the cameras that I'm talking about. All right, number 2, and this is in kind of the same vein, still a Micro Four Thirds camera, but it's the Blackmagic Pocket 4K. This is honestly a no-brainer, and you can get this for $1,000, I think, brand new, which is insane. If you buy it brand new, you get the DaVinci Resolve Studio for free, and this camera actually recently got updated so you can shoot ProRes RAW. So even if you don't edit in DaVinci, if you want to shoot ProRes RAW and edit in something like Premiere or Final Cut, you can do it, which is really, really cool. And it's just crazy how much of a punch the Pocket 4K still packs. Yes, there are things that you would lose if you decided to go with a Pocket 4K over something like a GH5. You couldn't shoot open gate, but it shoots amazing 4K video. You can shoot in RAW. It's got dual base ISO. It's got everything that you would need to like make something really, really good. I have a buddy in Texas that still uses a couple Blackmagic Pocket 4Ks for his production company, and the footage looks great. I've edited some of his footage and it looks amazing. So Blackmagic Pocket 4K, again, brand new. It should only be $1,000, and used, I've seen it anywhere from like $600 to $700 used, which is just bonkers. And what's really cool is that like there's a bunch of accessories now that are also, pretty inexpensive for the Pocket 4K. Cages, speed boosters, all that kind of stuff. So another thing about the Pocket 4K is that since it is a cinema camera, you're going to get a lot of the things that you'll expect from a cinema camera, like really low latency on the HDMI feed. You get really good audio ports. The interface is really easy to use as well. So the Pocket 4K is just another no-brainer when it comes to video cameras under $1,000. The only thing that might make me hesitate is that it's not a very good like YouTuber camera, I would say, but still you can make it work. Speaking of YouTuber cameras, number 3 is the Canon R50V. Now, there are some caveats with this camera, but I have seen some really good stuff coming out of the R50V, and it is really, really cheap. I think brand new on Amazon, you can get it for like $570. That's brand new, body only. So that's pretty sweet. It is kind of a entry-level creator camera. It does have tally lights, and you can record basically nonstop. So you can use it for like podcasting and stuff like that. You do get 10-bit and you get 4K. It is C-Log 3. So it is a log profile, but not the best Canon log profile that's out there. And it does have a more Sony FX3 style body, but there are some caveats. One is that the body is really cheap feeling. I have held that camera before and it doesn't feel premium by any means. And one of the biggest things though is that it has a 32 millisecond readout speed, which is pretty slow. So that's something that you have to consider. If this was just going to be a tripod camera, I think it would make a lot of sense. There are more and more inexpensive Canon RFS lenses that are coming out. I'm pretty sure even the Sigma 18 to 50 is offered in an RF mount now, which is pretty sweet. So that would be a good camera to get just as like a tripod camera, maybe like a YouTube studio camera or something like that. I can't really say that it's the camera that I would pick if I was, starting to do freelance video work again. I probably wouldn't want to show up with an R50V, But if I was just doing YouTube stuff, I think the R50V is actually a pretty solid choice, especially for the price. So another camera that I think is really good for YouTubers, but is probably a big step up, is the Sony ZV-E10 Mark II. My buddy Spencer actually did an entire video about how he is using this camera as like an EDC camera, and the footage looks really, really good. It's essentially got, I think, the same sensor as the Sony FX30 and A6700, but it's more of like a creator style camera. So this shoots in 4K 10-bit with, I believe, all the Sony S-Log profiles, which is pretty cool. And it has the great Sony autofocus. This is another camera that, you know, might not be something that I would probably show up on set with if I was getting paid, but for YouTube content creation, I think that it would be a really great option. This camera can be had for around $700 to $900 in the used market right now. So that's a pretty good deal, and it gets you in to the Sony ecosystem. So if I just needed a quick camera to start creating content really, really fast, and I knew that maybe I was going to upgrade to an FX30 or an FX3 or something in the future, getting a ZV-E10 Mark II would be a pretty good starting point for me. So number 5 would be one from Fujifilm, which I think is actually a pretty compelling option, and that's the Fujifilm XM5. Now, from the videos that I've watched on this camera, it doesn't seem like the autofocus is perfect, which doesn't really bother me that much. I mean, I'm using a GH5, but in 4K 24p and 10-bit, you can record nonstop until the battery dies without this camera overheating, which is pretty cool. You will find that it overheats in 4K 60, I believe. Fujifilm does make a fan that works with this XM5, which is pretty cool, and that'll basically extend the record time to as long as the battery can stay on for. So this also shoots in 6.2 open gate, which is something that the Sony and Canon camera that I just talked about obviously can't do. It's even something that a lot of the bigger cameras still can't do, which is kind of crazy. But the XM5 would get you into the Fujifilm ecosystem, which is pretty cool because I've always been, you know, pretty intrigued, especially with the Fujifilm X-H2S. Joshua Martin makes that camera look amazing on the sets that he brings it onto. So that would be another pretty solid option for me. I think that I could actually use that on paid work just because of how good the image looks and the fact that that Fujifilm fan can extend the runtime if I need to shoot really long 60p sessions. So that's another pretty solid option. And that camera can be had for around $800 to $900 right now. Okay, last and not least, and the camera that has the largest sensor, you probably guessed it, it's the Lumix S5. So the S5 is a camera that I have owned in the past, and it is one of the least expensive full frame Lumix cameras in the used market. So you're getting a full frame sensor, you can shoot open gate, you have 4K 60p with a crop, it's got amazing image quality, amazing IBIS. It won't overheat on you, but you also can't record past 30 minutes, which is kind of a bummer. But that doesn't really bother me too much if I was just doing YouTube content, or maybe I was shooting corporate videos. Typically, an interview shot doesn't last longer than 30 minutes, and you can always just start and stop the camera again. So that would be a really solid option. Obviously, I've owned that camera before. I know Lumix really well, and the sensor on that camera is amazing. So that would be a really solid option. But those are my 6 options. If I lost all my cameras right now, if I had to start from scratch, those would be the 6 cameras that I would look into. And I think any one of those I could make work and still create some pretty good videos with. So I hope that you enjoyed this episode of the Long Lens Podcast. Thank you so much for stopping by, and I'll catch you next time. Bye.